At long last, peace has been imposed on Gaza. Welcome, Swagatham. Finally, we have something to be cheerful about. The long awaited announcement of peace, apparently, peace being re established on the Gaza Strip, the abandonment of hostilities between two absolutely mutually hating sections of people has been announced. And apparently, all credit goes to Donald Trump. One of the greatest ironies of our times is that Donald Trump is the global peacemaker. And while he builds up his image as a global peacemaker, he is also projecting his image domestically as a war maker. He has declared war on his own people. The standoff between various states and the federal government regarding the deployment of federal troops is just one of its manifestations. Even more significant is the renaming of the Ministry or Department of Defense into the Department of War. So America as a nation embraces war, but overseas it wants to be projected, and Trump wants to project himself as the peacemaker unrivaled in human history. So let's ask ourselves, are we happy that hostilities are going to end? Of course, we are extremely happy, greatly relieved. Is there any guarantee that this will result in lasting, enduring peace? I'm afraid I have great worries in this regard, and in this video, I'll tell you why. The very first principle about making peace or establishing peace, and here I'm indebted to the German philosopher Immanuel Kant, particularly his principles for enduring or for perpetual peace. The phrase he uses is perpetual peace. The very first principle he enunciates is that no peace can be established between two countries where the interest of one is compromised at the interest of peace. Unless and until justice is done to both parties through the attainment of peace, it is not peace. It's an arrangement that is worked out on the basis of the helplessness of one of the parties. And I think the present situation fits this description perfectly. So what has happened is that Hamas has been finally forced, much against its will, to recognize its utter helplessness. And that helplessness is now packaged as peace for the people of Palestine, or people of Gaza in particular. So if that logic holds, then it is not inappropriate to say that this peace arrangement, within quotes peace arrangement, will last as long as the helplessness of Hamas lasts. Israel knows it, Netanyahu knows it, and that's the reason why Israel insists on disarming Hamas. I'm not in favor of any armed group holding a people to ransom. I have no doubt at all that the people of Gaza are also victims of Hamas, even as they're victims of a much more powerful enemy called Israel. They're double victims. They're victimized by Hamas at home and Israel away from home. That's a tragic plight of the people of Gaza. So Israel knows that so long as Hamas remains, and Hamas retains its arms, war can break out anytime, or the kind of attack on Israel that happened on the 7th of October 2 years ago can happen again. And therefore, Israel as a state, or Jews as a people, will not be at peace so long as Hamas remains as a fighting organization. But there is a particular contradiction that is included in this peace deal. The details are still awaited. I'm forming my opinions based on whatever information is available as of now. Now, on the one hand, Hamas agrees that it will not have any part in government, it will not be a political force. On the other hand, it also insists that it will not disarm and it will continue to be a fighting militia. Now, I find these two averments or claims or assertions completely contradictory. You cannot have a viable state where non-state actors have all the muscle and the so-called state or the rump of the state has all civic duties. This is completely unviable. It is a contradiction in terms. It will not work out. And as soon as Hamas can resume hostilities, they will. There's no question about it. Because the very survival of Hamas, the relevance of Hamas depends on bloodshed being continued in Gaza, just as the political survival of Benjamin Netanyahu depends entirely on the continuation of hostilities between Israel and the Palestinians. So that's how it is. That's how perverse the situation is. So I have serious misgivings about the viability and the durability of the so-called peace that's claimed to have been achieved in this regard. Now let's look at the tragic aspect of this. I still recall seeing on my television screen very early in the day the ecstatic faces of Palestinians, the residents of Gaza, who are celebrating in tremendous ecstasy the horrible attack perpetrated on the Jews. They were in ecstasy about so much pain, destruction, and death having been wrought upon their neighbors. Now, think of what happened thereafter. The prolonged misery of the very same people. And they're thirsting for peace. They were praying that somehow or the other this will come to an end, not realizing that their plight has been brought upon them by the very same attitude that revels in the misery of others. So one thing must be clear to everyone. I cannot be at peace at the cost of your peace and justice. I cannot thrive by making you miserable. I cannot enjoy life, make my life meaningful, or claim my personal dignity without regarding the same as valuable for all of you. This is the fundamental lesson. There is no escape from it. That's the reason why Jesus said, do unto others what you would that they should do to you. You want to live in peace? Learn to live in peace with others. And this goes even more for the Jews. If you would recall, 2 years ago, I shared a video with you, and I predicted at that time that going the way the state of Israel proposes to, at that time, action had not really begun. I predicted at that time that even though Israel will have tremendous victories on the battlefield, on the balance, it will end up as a terrible loser. And the Jews will once again become a hated community, a hated people all over the world. I'm afraid it has happened to a far greater extent than I had anticipated and apprehended at that time. Israel has never been more isolated in the international arena than it is now. More countries, more people's movements consider Israel an insufferable people. A people who have no qualms in unleashing terror and injustice on others. The sense of insecurity that the Jews have to live with for the decades to come is nothing to boast of. In fact, the story of Gaza has not ended, it will not end. Now it will be acted out in various parts of the world, and Jews will be at the receiving end. I'm not happy to say this, but that's how it's going to be. I can't help it, you can't help it. It's a logic of history. And Those who heed the lessons of history may be wiser for it. So, one lesson that Gaza, read as a parable, brings home to all of us is that violence is not the problem, not the solution, but the problem. Violence is not the solution, but the problem. And this has a bearing on the Indo Pakistan situation. After all, like the Jews and the Palestinians, we too are slipping into this diabolic groove of deriving all our sense of pride, even national identity, on the basis of hate and violence alone. This is a thoroughly unprofitable business. It's an unviable state. And the people will end up as victims, just as the people on both sides of the border in Gaza are victims and will continue to be victims. Now, let me just digress a little bit into this. Think of Gaza. 90% of all infrastructure, built up infrastructure in Gaza, has been razed to the ground. All civic facilities have been completely obliterated. There's only one remnant of a hospital that still stands. Everything else is ruined. All schools, universities, hospitals, all civic facilities. There is no electricity, no water. And the debris that is accumulated through the destruction of the built-in infrastructure, various houses, etc., will take at least 3 decades to clear. The present generation will not be able to live on Gaza. And the land has become completely uncultivable. Nothing will grow on Gaza. How will a population of 2.3, 2.4 million people be sustained on this very small, narrow strip of land when nothing will grow and there'll be no water and electricity? So the misery of the people is not going to end. And what about the psychological trauma? What's called the post traumatic stress. All kinds of psychological problems are going to erupt, and that very soon, as far as the people of Gaza are concerned. Think of the children who have grown up among bombs, rockets, missiles. Think of the children who have seen their relatives blown to smithereens by bombs and missiles. Think of the children who have had to starve and had to see other children die of starvation, and so on and so forth. How can these painful memories be ever erased from the minds of the people? So the post-stress trauma is going to continue, and it's going to spew up a whole range of psychological problems, and there's no provision to meet these needs. So that is what the people of Gaza have achieved through this violence. And the people of Israel, their economy has taken a serious beating, but that's okay. Israel knows, the Jews know that they can never live in peace, and they will have all kinds of terrorist episodes within Israel. Jews traveling abroad will be vulnerable. Israel as a state is now despised, ostracized by other nations of the world. It has become a global pariah. Recall how dozens and dozens of delegates walked out even as Benjamin Netanyahu stood up to speak, addressing the United Nations General Assembly. Nothing more needs to be said. That's the extent of isolation, alienation, and pariah status that Israel has achieved through their great exploits against their defenseless people. So, on the whole, for both sides, it's an absolutely no-win situation. It's loss and loss and loss, and not loss for a short period of time. It's long-standing loss from which both sides are unlikely to recover in our generation, maybe not even in the next generation. This is what violence as a problem-solving strategy can yield. It has never solved a problem. Then, of course, you would ask me, what is the other way? If not violence, what would work? love work? No, I agree with you that in the kind of scheme of things that all of us together have created, love will not work. So we're only left with violence. Yes, you have no alternative but to use violence. But after using violence, what? More violence, more and more violence. And you get enslaved by the necessity to practice more violence or the necessity to suffer from more and more violence. What else? What else have you achieved? Look at Gaza. Gaza must remain forever a parable on the dynamics of violence, the futility and madness of violence. It doesn't solve a problem. Is it possible for the Jews and the Palestinians to come together and solve their problems? It would have been possible if they were allowed to, but unfortunately, between them stands the Great Wall of China. That's called religion. Religion. The single sole cause of this misery is religion. Please understand. You can't understand the situation that we are dealing with, and you can't make any progress regarding the situation if you don't understand this most fundamental fact, that the Jews and the Palestinians are alike sufferers from this diabolic phenomenon called religion of hate. All religions preach love, compassion, justice, peace. Every religion, when it comes to protecting and promoting its interest, advocates violence, glorifies injustice, and renounces compassion. This is a hypocrisy that we have seen all through the religious history of humankind. And I challenge you to come up with an exception to this rule. Buddhism is, of all religions, the one that's most compassionate. After all, the entire spiritual philosophy of Lord Buddha is focused on compassion. It's also predicated on ahimsa, non-violence. But look at the Buddhist monks in Sri Lanka and Myanmar, or wherever. So, rest assured, there is no peaceful religion. Spirituality is totally and absolutely committed to peace and justice. Religion is committed exactly to the opposite. That's all that we have seen so far. And there's no basis to believe that something different to this rule or this pattern will come into being. So let's realize that the people of Gaza, like the people in Israel, are all held hostage by religions, two religions. And the irony is that these two religions are two sides of the same coin. Their forefathers, Isaac and Ishmael, were children of the same man, Abraham. And Abraham is considered the father of faith by Christians also. So Christians, Jews, Muslims have one common father of faith, which is Abraham. And their children can never be at peace. And that's what religion contributes to humanity. This is madness. And the sooner we realize this, the better. Whether it is in this region or all over the world, religion remains the number one enemy to human welfare, human dignity, and human freedom. Europe began to progress even materially only after it embraced secularism as a way of life, which meant that by common consent, religion was excluded from public life. Why did they have to do it? Because they realized through very painful experiences spread over a long period of time that religion will perpetuate conflict and human misery and will subvert the project of progress. It will always keep a people negative and underdeveloped, and therefore robbed of their fundamental right to live in peace, dignity, and freedom. But ironically, people are willing to die for religion, whereas they will not take spirituality seriously at all. That is the utmost reach of human perversity. We seem to be in love with darkness, and to that extent, we also despise, hate light. So, one of the most beautiful teachings in Jesus Christ is do the work of light while there is light. For the time is coming when no man can do any good work. So I remember having a private conversation with Hamid Ansari, who was at that time the Vice President of India. For some very strange reason, he was very kindly disposed to me and even thought highly of me. So he used to invite me for a cup of tea for private discussions. So in one of our meetings, the topic of discussion was corruption. He was very keen to understand what I thought about corruption. So I told him that the only way to understand corruption is through work. Work is the medium of corruption. If there is no work, there is no corruption. So ultimately, the issue is not whether or not there is corruption. The issue is whether or not a people are equipped, challenged, empowered, educated to do the work of light rather than the work of darkness. So he said, he suddenly, virtually, he jumped up from where he was saying. He said, from where did you get this? So I said, from the Bible. So he went and brought a copy of his Bible. He said, can you show me where it is? I said, sure. It's in the Gospel of John. And I took the copy of the Bible and I showed him the passage. And he sat there reading it 5 times. That's what it is. The fundamental challenge, my dear friends, is not to stop hostilities. The fundamental transformative, creative task is to educate and train a people to do the work of light. All the training, all the inspiration that we have got and we are still getting is to do the work of darkness. I'm not exaggerating the case. And this applies even to formal education. Intense, undiluted pursuit of self-interest. Is that not darkness? If you look at it from a human perspective, what humanity should be, then you know that it is darkness. If you don't have a perspective, then there's no problem. But when I look at it from my perspective of what it means to be human, this selfishness at work is darkness. And all that we are doing, including the charitable deeds, are all inspired by selfishness. That's the work of darkness. So the most fundamental agenda before the global community, and that's the spiritual task, is to inspire, educate, train, and challenge human beings, members of the human family, to do the work of light. Let that be the goal. Let me remind all of us again of the words of Jesus. Do the work of light while there is still light, for a time is coming when no man can do any good work. But then John goes on to say, the light that was to illumine the world was coming into the world, but men preferred darkness to light because their deeds were evil. But men preferred darkness to light because their deeds were evil. You remember what Nehru said when Gandhi was shot by Nathuram Vinayak Godse? The light has gone out of our life and there is darkness everywhere. The light has gone out of our lives, and yet I was wrong. For the light that illumined this land was no ordinary light. Light, light, light. And let me conclude by sharing with you the last words of the great German author, perhaps the greatest German genius ever, Goethe, Goethe, Goethe. When he was on his deathbed, the last words he uttered were, a little more light. A little more light. That's all that I also have to say. There's nothing more I wish to say. A little more light. A little more light. जरा सा रोशनी दे दो. जरा सा रोशनी दे दो. नमस्कार.